What's up guys, ATCZ here, welcome back to Yugioh Deck of the Day. Today we have another deck that got a huge boost from the Phantom Rage booster set. We have Prank Kids. This deck has had successful potential in the past. It has also won a YCS 2 years ago in Milan, but ever since the community figured out how the deck works and how to counter it, it lost a lot of popularity and the deck was knocked off as a competitive threat. But now with the release of a new monster in Phantom Rage core set, this deck has the potential to become a tier 1 threat again, and it's so good right now because the deck already had enough power to back it up before, but the deck was not very consistent because you had to open like a fusion spell and 2 Prank Kids monster, which is not very optimal for a consistent deck. But now with just 1 Prank Kids monster, the deck can do a lot. So let's go into the deck profile and I'll explain to you every card and why they're here. Before we begin, if you enjoy this video, drop a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our upcoming videos. And now let's get to the deck profile. So to start things off, we have the Prank Kids monsters. All of the Prank Kids monsters have an effect that when they're used for a link material or a fusion material for a Prank Kids monster, they do something and then they special summon another copy of Prank Kids monster except from themselves from the deck. So we have 3 copies of Lampsies. This one burns your opponent 500 and special summon another monster. We have 3 copies of Dropsies. This one gives you 1000 life points to special summon another monster. 3 copies of Fancies. This one sends a Prank Kids monster, Prank Kids card actually from your deck to the grave, which is important because there is a card that you want to send to the grave because it has a grave effect and also because you want to retrieve it with a lot of Prank Kids extra deck monsters. So this one I think is the best out of all of them because it gives you something for your combo aside from doing something minimal like burning or giving you life. And 3 copies of Roxy's, which you draw 1, you banish 1, and then you special summon a Prank Kids from your deck. So these 12 monsters, along with a field spell and a copy of Terraforming, give you a total of 16 starters that any one of them can give you a full combo, which ends on Battle Battler being able to Raigeki your opponent twice. Before, if you were opening just a bunch of monsters, that was considered the brick of the deck, because without a fusion spell, you did not have a way to trigger their effects. But now that we have a Link 1, which is exactly what this deck needed, they can also be starters just on their own. And if you have the fusion spells in your hand, these are now considered extenders. So if your opponent stops like something, they ash your first Prank Kids monster when you summon your Meow Meow, then you can poly to special summon a Rocket Ride and then continue that. And this deck actually, because it's so consistent, can do 1-card combos. It also has the potential to run a lot of hand traps. So of course we play as many as possible. So we have 3 copies of Asp Blossom, 3 copies of Effect Veiler, which I'm liking more and more going to the format as long as Anaconda and Dragoon around, and 3 copies of Gamma with the 1 driver. This one is specifically good in this deck because you also have the potential to activate it during your own turn. Because Droll has become a relevant card, when you activate a card like Terraforming or your Prank Kids Place to search, your opponent will draw you to stop you from searching with Doodle. Then you can use this to basically stop them, or if they ash it, or if you're going second and you start with Pandemonium, Pandemonium locks you into Prank Kids after it resolves, so as long as we're in the resolution, you can actually use Gamma. So if your opponent activates like a Savage to try to negate your Pandemonium, then you can use Gamma there. So there are a lot of cards you can activate before you put a monster on the board, which is why Gamma I think is a really good card in this deck. For the spells, we have 3 copies of Prank Kids Place, the field spell that searches you any Prank Kids monster. It also has effects to boost your own Prank Kids monsters and lower the attack points of your opponent's monsters, which can become relevant in grind games, but we don't see these grind games too often anymore. But still, these effects are decent to have just in case. 3 copies of Prank Kids Pandemonium. This card is the special summon of the battler during your opponent's turn. The problem with this card is that it locks you into Prank Kids, so you cannot go into Totally Awesome if you use this unless you summon your Totally before you use this, which is possible. But the good thing about this card is that you can add it back with your Doodle, so you can actually use it during your opponent's turn, and it's a quick play, so you can summon Butler during your opponent's turn. You will get 3 floats because you use 3 materials for Butler, so you get 4 monsters with 1 card, and because of Meow Meow's effect, Butler can use its effect twice, and a double Raigeki, some decks just cannot recover from that, so this card is really good. But keep in mind its restriction because it can clog the field sometimes because you want to go into Borlsor to go for a game, or you would like to summon a Totally Awesome before to play around something like Nibiru or any other hand trap. So keep in mind, if you do not have to activate this first, do not activate it first just because it will give you the restriction. 2 copies of Prank Kids Pranks. I'm considering maxing out this card, but still it's not the best card because I think this card works only if your opponent stops you. Like if your opponent uses Nash on the first Prank Kids monster and you have this and you can summon a token, so with your Meow Meow you can go into your Doodle, but if your opponent doesn't stop you, this card doesn't really do much aside from the end phase effect, which I think is really great because during the end phase you can shuffle 3 Prank Kids monsters from your grave into the deck and draw a card, which is really good because it gives you a lot of recovery as well, so you don't need to play something like a Pot of Avarice in the deck, and also gives you the freedom to run 2 copies of each Prank Kids monsters in the extra deck instead of running 3 because you can recycle them, so you don't have to lose to the grind game just because you did not max out them, which gives you space for other cards in the extra deck. But I don't think this card is worth maxing out. Still a really good card. Now for the generic spells, we have 3 polymerizations. Yes, this is a generic spell, but it's basically for a deck like this because it's another extender. Before we used to play Invocation as well, which I don't think you should play anymore because like I said, you don't really need to see a fusion spell right now to do a play. I've seen people also cut copies of Polys and Pandemoniums, but I think you need to max out at least these two just to have enough extenders, because if you play less, then you rely a lot on your normal summon resolving. Like if your opponent bounces your normal summon, you can summon your Meow Meow, then you're screwed. Or if your opponent ashes your first Prankins monster, so you cannot use your Meow Meow and the new Prankins monster to go into Doodle to get another special and get another search, then your turn will probably end as well. So I think playing 6 of these cards, 3 Pandemonium and 3 Poly, is good enough. We also play another card there to show you next, which is another extender, so I think you need to play these. 1 Instant Fusion, special summon your Rocket Ride. This card Instant Fusion is basically the best card in this deck because you can just summon a monster that revives 2 monsters, and going to 1 actually hurt this deck a lot, but still we're going to use the 1 copy. 1 Terraforming for your place, giving you 6 in starters, like I said. 1 Call by the Grave, because sometimes this 1 Ash can hurt you, or a draw if you start with your place because you need to start with your Doodle. And for the traps, we have 1 Prankis Plan, just 1 copy because I do not play Desires anymore. I used to play Desires in the deck, but I don't think you need it anymore because you don't need to dig for any combo pieces. You play 16, so it's not like you will ever start without one. And if you do, then that's very unlucky because with 16 starters, you have actually a lot of chances of opening just one of them. But this card is here because it gives you access to Roaring Roaster, so you can also have a Harp's Feather Duster effect aside from using a Raigeki effect just to cover more matchups, because Butler doesn't do anything against a deck like Altergeist or Subterrors, but Roaring Roaster Dragon is an auto-win against these decks, so you can send this to the grave with Fancies, add it back, and then use it in your opponent's turn to basically wipe their back row. It also has a grave effect that will basically reduce the attack of your opponent's monsters, so you can catch your opponents by surprise with that. And also play 3 Impermanence, running out the total hand drop count to 12. You can play Nibiru if you want as well. I just think the most generic hand drops in the main deck in a deck like this is more mandatory, because it's not a going second deck like a deck like Tri-Brigade Zoo or something that wants to go second, then yes, you want to main Nibiru there. But in this deck where you want to go first, you just play cards that you can either activate after you've made a board, or cards like Gamma, which you can activate to help you make a board if your opponent tries to disrupt you before you put a monster on the field. That's it for the main deck, and now let's go into the extra deck. We have the best card in the deck by far now, 2 copies of Prankies Meow Meow. This card is insane. This gave the deck the consistency that it never had. I've playtested this deck before, and there were a lot of times where I could not do anything. And this is the reason this deck was not a tier 1 deck. It's still not a tier 1 deck because cards like Buster Dragon exist, but once the Destruction Sword gets banned, hopefully next ban list, this deck is actually going to be very, very threatening. Meow Meow not only helps you combo with just 1 card, like I said, because you will link into any Prankids, and then the Prankids monster will float, then you summon Doodle with Search, and since you summon a second copy of a Prankids monster from your deck, this will float as well, so you get another monster on the field, and you can see the interaction going there. You just get a lot more cards by just using your normal summon. And it also has a second effect that is actually more relevant than people think, because it helps you trigger Butler twice per turn, because if you tribute a monster, a Prankies monster, to activate an effect, you can banish this card from your graveyard instead. Butler needs to tribute itself to use its Raigeki effect, but it's not a once per turn effect. So if the first time you'd use it, you banish this instead, then you can use it again by actually tributing your Butler, so you can board wipe your opponent twice. And like I said, there are not many decks that can play around that, especially if they're combo decks like Dragon Link. If you Raigeki them once when they use the Metal Marches effect before they summon Herald, and then even if they have enough extenders, try to do another play, Raigeking them twice, there's absolutely no way they can come back with that, because a card like Soul Charge doesn't exist anymore, so they don't have something to get all those resources back from it. 2 copies of Doodle. This is probably the best link next to the Meow Meow because it gives you a search, and also you can tribute it to target 2 Prankids cards in your grave and add them to your hand. This is the reason Pandemonium is so good, because you don't have to use it, you can just send it with Fancies, then add it back and use it during your opponent's turn to summon your Butler. You will get 3 floats, and you will get a monster you can board up your opponent twice, which is really, really good. 2 copies of Bow Wow. This card helps you play around cards like Call by the Grave. If you tribute your Butler, then you can chain this, because during your opponent's turn, you can chain this to special summon to get 2 Prankids cards from your grave. So the good thing about this is that you Call by the Grave will lose its target, and also this card helps you get more cards back. And the turn you use its effect, your Prankids monsters cannot be destroyed by your opponent's card effects, and in combination with another monster, you can actually make your board completely indestructible. So this deck is insane in time, because if you remember how this deck functioned, and if you saw what it did during that YCS, you saw that time was its best friend because of cards like Lampsies, Dropsies, and the defense of your Bow Wow and your Weather Washer, because you can wall up with a board that cannot be destroyed and also gain life points while burning your opponent. So this deck can actually take advantage of the time rules really, really well, which is another great thing about this deck, because if you want to play competitively, you have to use everything to your advantage, so this is something you can do. 1 copy of Roaring Roaster. This card is insane for those matchups like Maltergeist, Subterrors, because Butler is not good against anything, but this covers pretty much anything, and this deck has coverage against every deck because of something like this. You can just pop your opponent's back row. For the generic Limb monsters, play 1 Phoenix, pop some back rows, 1 Unicorn to link climb, and 1 Boral Sword to go into some case. For the fusion monsters, we have 2 copies of Rocket Ride. This is basically a double monster reborn. You tribute it, you special summon 2 Prankids monsters from your grave. They can't be fusion monsters, but you don't really care because special summon monsters are going to float anyway. And also has an effect that if it's fusion summoned, it can lose 1,000 attack and attack directly. So this is something that keep in mind because it's another thing that helps this deck in time. If your opponent doesn't know about it, if they don't negate it, then you can just run them over, or they're forced to negate if you're getting close to time. So you can actually use something else. So this card is really, really good. One copy of Weather Washer. This card is cuttable if you want, but I still like it just because I said there's the combo with Bow Wow that if you use both of their effects during the same turn, you basically get a field that's indestructible. Because like Bow Wow, you can use this during your opponent's turn. You tribute it to special summon 2 Prankits monsters from your grave, and they cannot be destroyed by battle this turn. And if you use Bow Wow's effect again, they cannot be destroyed by card effects. So this is why these monsters, unless your opponent actually just something like completely untargetable, non-destructing effect, then basically you can just get rid of the cards this way, but still not the very easiest thing to do. So this is why I like playing one copy of this card. And one copy of Battle Butler, which is the main disruption of the deck. You can use its effect twice, and also it has a floating effect. If it's sent to the grave by an opponent's card, you target a non-fusion monster in your grave and special summon it. And it doesn't say Prankins monster, you can just special summon anything from the grave, which is really, really good. And one copy of Totally Awesome, because it is possible to special summon 2 copies of Dropsies, because you cannot special summon Dropsies with Dropsies, but you have 3 other monsters that cannot get access to Dropsies from the deck. So if you use like a Fancies or a Lampsies, you can special summon 2 Dropsies, and then you can go into Totally Awesome this way, which helps you play around Nibiru or force an early Nibiru before a choke point, so you can continue with your combo. And this white card is really good. And also when it's tributed, you will add back a Dropsies to have more materials for next turn. You don't have to recycle this one copy of Totally Awesome. So yep, that's the deck, guys. It's a really, really fun deck. There are a lot of other options you can run. I've seen people run copies of Thunder Fusion because Battle Butter is a Thunder monster, so you can summon it this way. There are a lot of other cards you can run. The deck is very flexible. You can tweak with the hand traps depending on the format you're playing in. But I think the cards you need to max out are definitely the Prankits cards that give you the start from Meow Meow, so the 16. Then you can tweak numbers with the fusion spells or other stuff. You can play more, you can play less. It's basically whatever requires your playstyle. So yep, it's a really good deck. We're hoping for a good ban list. Decks like this and basically Zoo and Phantom Knights can become very, very powerful with the adjustive ban list, because right now cards like the Bastard Log just destroy these decks because you need to access your extra deck in order to start comboing off. So if you don't stop your opponent with a lot of hand traps and they don't need to do a full combo, just a Bastard Log on a Savage is basically game for all these decks. But hopefully Konami addresses these during the next ban list so we can enjoy new decks and a new format. So yep, if you enjoyed this video, guys, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our upcoming videos, and we'll see you next time.